Good afternoon, Ruby Lane. This is Michael Canadas with the Grovian Doll Museum. We are delighted today to share with you a presentation having to do with our recent China retreat that we had in Pacific Grove, California. And this area, Pacific Grove, was originally a retreat. So we thought it would be a great idea to have an educational weekend, and our students here had over 20 hours of instruction on all things having to do with China and porcelain dolls. We were very fortunate to have really some of the most, one is an absolute legend in the doll world, Elizabeth Ann Coleman, instruct for us, and the other is actually a first time we've ever had a Ruby Lane seller, Turner of Virtu Dolls. The two of them, the dynamic duo, got together and created for us a special and unique program on Chinas. I am here to introduce those of you that don't know Elizabeth Ann Coleman and don't know Turner. They're here and they've agreed to give us a little mini version because they're tired because they worked so hard this weekend. But you know, as we say, if you're friends with Michael and David, you're gonna work hard.
Amen. Oh my God.
But it was fun work.
It was absolutely delightful.
And educational for us as well as our students.
Well, you know, there's a saying that teamwork makes dream work. So here before you, which you two have barely had a chance to look at our little mini special.
Absolutely. And this is
because you've been working. So would you be so kind as to share some of the things that you imparted on our attendees?
Well, that was
the whole
all
wide world.
That was all scripted. This is all going
live.
to be live.
Right.
So this is going to be extra special
good.
for everybody concerned,
Absolutely.
right, Kathy?
I think you should go first and
You should go
select
first.
something special to discuss.
Okay.
And I'm going to step out of the picture and let you two have at it, because I have learned so much this weekend that I want to learn a little more right now.
Well, hopefully we will not be turning our backs on you now that we are in position for what we hope is going to be as an exciting experience in China Shoulderhead land for you as it is for us here in Pacific Grove at the Carmel Doll Shop and the Grovian Museum. First of all, how can anyone not like a Kling head? Kling was one of the most prolific manufacturers in Germany, and they produced for a number of years, but one of their specialities was gorgeous girls and women. And here we have an absolutely exquisite lady from the 1870s whose jewelry is as extravagant as her hair. And if I have permission to sort of pirouette her around or pivot her around, I think you will agree this is an outstanding example and something that every porcelain doll collector would be more than excited to have. Now, there's not just one of these gorgeous Kling ladies on the table here, but I think coming up next is going to be a fabulous...
If I may be so bold.
Yes,
well, I think we'll allow you
absolutely.
now.
At this point, you can touch anything you want.
So now I'm drawn to yet another fabulous Kling lady with a feature that is frequently found on the finest Kling dolls, which is the applied decorations in the ruffle and bow and collar, and also, if I'm not mistaken, particular identification marks for this exceptional series of dolls, which has an alphanumeric numbering system on it.
And the Kistner Firm used a variety of marking techniques which all collectors should become familiar with.
Another feature of these Kling heads is that when they had pierced ears, they were typically, and now this one may be an anomaly, Ms. Coleman, they were typically pierced into the head. This one is pierced through the lobe of the ear.
Well, good for her.
I don't know if that is visible, but you can see from the back that they actually go through the lobes, which is not typical of the Kling products.
Well, as Kathy Turner and I have worked on all sorts of porcelain shoulder head for dolls over the past decade now, we're embarrassed to say that, we have had great fun in finding the anomalies in the manufacturer's products.
Perhaps I could hand another one off to Ms. Coleman to discuss.
And we'll see if she has a number. Oh, this one got away from the numbering system, but she could come with both a bodice decorated like this and in many other forms. It's one of the features of the Klings that you think you've seen the heads done one way, but then you see, oh my goodness, it's got a bodice on of a totally different color combination and totally different design. And as we say, these Kling heads with their cafe au lait hair are some of the most beautiful representations of 1870s and 1880s hairstyles. One of the big clues in identifying these, you had a hand in, if I'm not mistaken, the City Museum of New York. Yes, the music. Well, they have the heads. They are not on display.
Sadly.
Sob. But they have a very interesting background because they were heads that were gathered together when George Borgfeldt, one of the major American distributors of dolls in the late 19th and early 20th century, was just getting started in business. And he collected these Kling heads for sale. And over the years, they just passed down in the business and finally ended up in the Museum of the City of New York. So there's a wonderful Kling archive of heads there to be seen, or found, I should say, since they aren't on view presently.
One would have to beg them, I guess, for access. I think let's move on to some other company over here that we have spent a good bit of time discussing. Maybe I can give one to Anne and one to myself, and these are from the Kistner Firm. And they have a distinctive feature in the eyebrows, which I'm not sure if the camera can pick that up or not, but they are two-tone eyebrows. They have a paler gray wash overlaid by a darker line. And that is a feature I don't believe we have typically seen in other dolls. So that is something of an identifying feature for the Kistner heads of this early period.
And what you're so lucky to see here are the two sizes, and you can see very close similarities, and you can see some areas where they vary slightly. These heads were made, I think the catalog says, in 20 different sizes, which is a large range, and they range from about 8.5 inches down to about 1.25 inches.
I think there were dollhouse sizes that were even smaller.
But the 20 sizes were really extremely wide in their range. Now, these have very nice shoulder head mold lines. I don't know whether the camera can pick it up. Mine does. I don't know about yours, Kathy.
This one, I think you can see this one right here.
And for
maybe right here.
And for collectors, you don't just stop at having a mold line on either shoulder. You can also find mold lines on the back where the head and the hair demanded an undercut, which demanded a third or a fourth mold part.
Not visible in these dolls and not used in these dolls. But one might note the way they are inside. You can sometimes feel inside to determine whether these are pressed or poured heads. And if you feel inside, this particular head is very rough. It's like you can feel the fingerprints of who pressed it originally into the mold. So this is a pressed in the mold head.
And another way is to hold it up to the light and see with horror the thickness of the clay inside. You'll find, particularly in areas around the eyes of the pressed heads, that they can be very, very thin and very, very scary at times. For the later poured heads, you're going to find an even layer of slip so that you don't find this terrifying
Inconsistencies,
heavy
yes.
and thin.
Shall I put this one?
Yes.
Now, do we have an example here of a 3-part mold by any chance? I'm not sure. Let me just take a peek at this head and see if we do or not. I'm not one that's visible, unfortunately, though that would be a suspect. Can you eyeball that one and see what you can see?
Well, what we have here is a very interesting thing, Kathy. Look at this. We have a line here, and we have a line here, almost as if we have an extra band going in there, and that line, again, repeats that thin.
But it could be where they just simply smoothed it out and weren't very careful with it. But
And now we're inside heads.
this one is a poured, is it not? Stick one finger inside there and find
Well,
out.
it's hard to tell because it's glazed all around. I thought maybe she was going to have identifying painter's marks inside.
Well, and
but
surely somebody here must.
I'm going to guess this one might.
There you go.
Guess what?
No, nothing.
No mark. Oh.
Well, hold on. We know those
We
didn't.
know that one's going to have it.
Nope.
No, that one.
Yes, why don't we move on?
Yes.
Nobody wants to see this this gorgeous KPM doll. Famous early manufacturer of China head dolls.
And famous for their porcelain
The quality.
beyond all the other doll makers.
And this is, of course, a brown-haired example. And we have a theory about this hairdo and the variations of the hairdos that you find on these KPM dolls. Anne can take credit for first recognizing this as a possibility, that in these lady dolls, they appear to have one or maybe two consistent faces, and then the hair varies in ways that we suspect mean this may not have been done in the mold, but might have been added features. If you can imagine that they might have molded this looped bun separately and then attached it with slip to the back of the head, and same with these braided side pieces.
And even these side pieces here are not consistent from head to head.
And then we go to the markings, and you can see the blue markings there, and then in red, the KPM markings as well. KPM consistently marked their pieces.
And those are both the factory marks, not the painters or the person who actually put the paste into the mold. The earlier heads, the ones that were pressed into the mold, frequently the person who pressed the heads into the mold inscribed, incised their identifying mark, whether it was an alpha or a numeric mark, so that at the end of the day, they could be paid for what they had done. And the same was true with the painters. You will find frequently the painter's marks in red or black inside the heads. And those are the painter's marks.
I think I have found us a painter's mark, and it's good because we can move on to one of the other most prolific companies, perhaps. This appears to be, would you agree, Ms. Coleman, an ABG head?
Is there any question?
None with my mind, none in my mind. And look inside. There we have what looks like a 21 in a dark color, which would most likely be the painter's mark. And if I'm not mistaken, there's also, I don't know if it's visible to the camera, there is also an inscribed mark inside there, which is probably the molder's mark. Sometimes those could have a meaning. Sometimes they were a size number. and sometimes they were just simply identifying who the molder was. So we recognize this as an ABG right away. Would you like to tell them how we identified it as such?
Well, she's in your hot little hands right now, so why don't you
I
carry
get
on?
that. One of the features of ABG heads is seen in the mouths, where there is a distinct darker line between the upper and lower lips. Not to say that other makers didn't do that as well, but that is distinctively done with this company. And they also typically had ears pierced into the head if they had pierced ears. The painting of the eyes were fairly consistent, except this one does not appear to have the typical white highlight in the eye. However, the iris is usually outlined in a darker color. The eyebrow color is usually a light brown with blonde hair, and sometimes even I think with the black hair, but usually the black-haired ones are going to have a darker color. And we have another kin. Would you like to handle her?
I'm going to pass her off to you.
Oh, I get to do this as well.
You're the ABG.
Oh, boy. So this ABG head, another ABG head, has a white highlight in the eye, which is what I was trying to describe as a common feature. And this one has a very dark outline around the iris of the eyes, has the same dark line through the upper and lower lips, the same light brown eyebrows. She has the added feature of a tricked out headband in red, which is kind of an uncommon color, I would say, for them. She has pierced ears pierced into the head. Let's see what's inside. Do we have anything? Yes, we do. We have another painter's mark inside there and some sort of scratchy, incised mark as well.
Now these heads are poured.
Yes, this is a poured head. These are unmarked. These were from the period before ABG started consistently marking their heads. Later, you will find a mold number, a hash mark, and a size number on the back of the shoulder plate, but these appear to predate that.
Now, I'm going to come back to this one because this one is important because she makes her appearance again in the 20th century from Japan. Yes. The Japanese copied this, but they tweaked it ever so slightly. And when you see these heads from Japan, usually identifiable by a paper sticker inside from the...
It'll say made in Japan.
Made in Japan. But they're all one size. They are a very rough surface finish. They can be glazed as well as the bisque finish, and the face was tweaked in the...
It was squished a bit.
So narrowed. That it's narrowed, and it has a much more adult-like appearance than these short-necked girls.
And I believe the Japanese dolls, they also had them in black hair in both China and bisque as well.
And Kathy, maybe you'd like to bring back Miss KPM, and because she has a wonderful neck. I think people might be interested to understand that the age of the doll is in its chronology can be identified by the length of the neck, and the KPM is obviously a woman, and with the shorter neck, we have a girl here in the ABG.
Absolutely.
Now, let's see what our next victim might be. I think let's take a look at this very identifiable lady to us. And she comes from a factory that we cannot identify. We probably never will be able to identify. We have only seen these doll heads in 3 styles. And this is quite important to understand that in the mid-19th century, the factories always had a woman. They generally had a girl, and they always had a boy doll. And I think most collectors don't realize how important boy China heads, Parian heads were in the 19th century. So there's mother here to this one, and there's a little boy and a little girl.
So there's a family. We know they're related from characteristics they share, but we haven't been able to assign them to a maker, unfortunately.
And they have a very, very deep shoulder, and the shoulders slope. And this is another way to begin to identify doll shoulder heads. It's the shape of their shoulders and the depth of their shoulders.
Low.
It's not a rule of thumb. None of our work indicates that anything is totally consistent throughout the production years.
May I choose mine?
Well, if you insist.
I think we should move into a Bohemian land creature.
I would leave her there.
I
would bring the camera to her.
I'm going to have her bring the camera to her, but we have found that there are a number of exquisite dolls that were made across the current border of Germany into Czechoslovakia, into the Bohemian region, and particularly in the vicinity of the town of Schlagenwald. And this fine doll of the type known to collectors as Morning Glory is an example of the work that came out of that area. Some of these dolls are identified inside by markings, typically just the letter S, and sometimes impressed double-digit numbers as well, of which we really don't know the meaning. Some of them that we identify with this company, this region, I should say, do not even have the S, but they have visual clues that give us the hint that they are from there as well, which leads us to the mystery girl on the next shelf, which I may allow Anne to handle.
If you are a collector of 19th century shoulder heads, this next lady sets your heart palpitating beyond description. Get the oxygen out.
She is just fabulous.
And this is a wonderful example of the application of ceramic bits and pieces. This would have been done by somebody after the doll has come out of the firing for the first time. But there's no way that you could do this in a mold because it's
well, this is freestanding,
and
even this here. She is just
and
incredible.
We suspect that all of the brown hair is applied to a basic head.
Unfortunately, she doesn't give us clues as to who made her, even though we think she may have kin in the Bohemian region. She does have, that would be probably a painter's tick mark there. And if I'm not mistaken, that there are some yet identified letters, TK, I think it is. Perhaps I can turn it a little better for the camera. Right there, but we don't know yet what that means. More research.
And more research. Unending research.
This is another feature I've noticed with some heads that we think might come from this region. You might notice how the bottom portion of the shoulder plate, front and back, has not been glazed. During the firing process, I presume that this would be an aid in not having them stick to the shelf as the porcelain glaze ran down. She has a great profile, too. She has kind of an overbite.
Oh, well, I'm sure she never went to an orthodontist.
No, probably not. I'd take her overbite and all, wouldn't you?
I think I could be forced to.
Now, who might you like to talk to next?
Okay, well, why don't we go look at our little Dressel Kistner there.
Well, we did these Dressel Kistners.
I mean,
not Dressel Kistner.
Klostervale. Sorry.
Well, I'm not sure. She's pinned down, so I'm not going to lift her up. We'll let the camera do that work. I'm going to let Anne tell you all about Klostervalesdorf.
Klostervalesdorf was a porcelain factory that was established in an old cloister, cloister, in the town of Valesdorf in Germany. And they produced for about 30, 40 years. Their dolls are relatively easily recognized, And that's thanks to their wonderful eyes. The particular feature of the eyes, whether they're glass eyes or still part of the porcelain body of the head, are the centipede-like eyelashes that the dolls have. They have them on the upper and lower levels of the eye, or lids of the eye. And as I say, you find almost 50% of them with the painted eyes and the glass eyes. What's interesting with them, however, is that they did have far more brown eyes proportionately in their doll head production. And we've learned in our work on this project that the old myth about the dolls having Queen Victoria's blue eyes is complete hooey, and that it was, as one might suspect, an economic feature. It was cheaper to buy blue paint than brown paint, and as we all must recognize, dolls were ephemeral pieces. We know that Hertwig produced over 5 million dolls in 1 year. So you can extrapolate the number of dolls that were produced by these other firms over the time frame that porcelain-headed dolls, shoulder doll heads were produced, and that runs from the 1830s up into the 1950s. So,
Do we have time for one more, or would you like to?
Well, if you want to have lunch today,
Oh, please. We're getting hungry.
they're getting hungry. They worked really hard. This wonderful journal was created for our workshop by these two ladies. And basically they worked for pennies an hour to put this together. They created it for this retreat. And they had some extra copies made so that you out there in the world can have some really new information. And this is available on Ruby Lane right now in Kathy's shop, which is Virtu and Virtu Antiques.
Virtu Doll.
Virtu Doll, okay.
Yes.
I thought it was antiques because you do jewelry too.
You know.
So there'll be a link that you can go right to it. This is an invaluable resource. I have had the pleasure of looking at it for a second. And we have two copies. We have our special copy from our good friends, autographed to us, which we will preserve perfectly. And we have a working copy that we're going to use, and it's going to look like it's been dragged through the bushes in about a week. So there is some new information in here. It's user-friendly, and please support it, because what we need in the doll world right now are more books. We've lost all of our book publishers for dolls, and this is really a labor of love from these two remarkable women. And if you ever have an opportunity to go to one of their events where they're giving a presentation or teaching, you absolutely should sign up. So we're going to say goodbye, Ruby Lane.
Bye.
Bye-bye.